the DASH plan. And part of what encouraged me to do this is that I have other dietitians that I provide educational tools for who are all across the country. And one of them is she does cancer rehabilitation as well as cardiac rehab. And she was talking about needing kind of a heart healthy diet information to use with her oncology clients. And in addition, we had, as part of our expert series at Cancer Services in December, our expert was a cardio oncologist, and he talked a lot about hypertension and the DASH plan for helping to promote good cardiovascular health. So I thought, well, I'm going to do a webinar on it. So that's where we are. Somebody said that the chat is, there we go. I think I fixed it. So the chat is enabled if you want. And of course, the Q&A, you're always welcome to throw questions in the Q&A for anybody who's on live today or in the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on that. My webinars recently have been about 30 minutes or so. So that's kind of nice, I think, to get our topic down to the basics and covered. But anyways, we are going to talk today about the DASH plan. DASH is an acronym for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. So we'll talk about what that is. But my name's Julie, if you don't already know, and I am the Community Engagement Director at Cancer Services. We're a local nonprofit community-based agency in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And we provide comprehensive support and practical needs for people going through cancer in our local area. And whoever wants to join us for our virtual programs is always welcome. I have a master's in public health. I think this talks about me. I have a new headshot here. I need to update my headshot on my Zoom profile, but I am a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I did my MPH at Chapel Hill. I did my undergrad degree at NC State, so I have a heart divided, I say. And it has been 16 years since I created cancerdietitian.com, and I'm really happy to be able to continue working on that through my time here at Cancer Services. So let's talk about why. What we'll cover is why would the DASH eating plan be something worth considering? What does it actually consist of, and what foods are important? And then I'll leave you with your action plan for today. So DASH itself is not just for hypertension. I know the name says Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, but if you're at all familiar with research, they always want acronyms so that their studies don't sound so weird. So this was a scientific study that was funded by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, so it didn't have any private funding, no commercial support behind it. So you don't have to think, oh, well, somebody wanted this to be successful for some kind of corporate or profit reason. There wasn't that behind it. And they have done multiple scientific trials since the eating plan was developed, and they have all showed good outcomes among the participants. And this diet is consistently ranked as one of the top healthiest diets by the U.S. News and World Report. Kind of every year they rank different diets. So this is one of the eating patterns that I think is a good one if you want a little bit more guidance in terms of what kind of pattern to eat. I think this is a good one, especially for those who might be concerned or trying to manage their risk for cardiovascular events and managing hypertension. The other thing, though, is that it's not as easy to find information on it because it wasn't a sort of commercially funded, quote, diet. There wasn't any person seeking profit that developed the plan. So with a lot of more popular, that maybe I would say not so healthy eating plans like keto diet or, back in the day, the South Beach diet or Atkins diet or paleo or I'm trying to think of Whole30, those types of things, they were developed by a person or a group who wanted to make money. Weight Watchers is a money-making, profit-oriented company. They are going to really spend a lot of money on marketing and promotion. And that's why it's, kind of everywhere in front of you. And so you think that because you see it all the time, it must be something that's good for you, which is not true. Most of those diets are very restrictive and not health promoting. But this one, because it was funded, by a health-oriented group that wasn't making profit off of it, there aren't a lot of books, flashy books out there for you to read. There are a few, and I would get one that was written by a dietitian if you do go this route, or at the end, I'll give you a website where you can find out more information. And if you email me, I can send you, I have a little handout that goes with this that I'm happy to send you. Oops, okay. So their findings on these research studies showed that blood pressures were reduced with an eating plan that emphasizes vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and includes fish, poultry, beans, nuts, and healthy oils. So that's the food that was concentrated on. It does focus on eating more foods that are rich in nutrients that can help lower blood pressure. And it turns out that those same nutrients are also helpful and meet the recommendations that are by the National Cancer Institute and the American Institute for Cancer Research. So it's not just hypertension or cardiovascular health that we're looking at. And if you've come to enough of my webinars, I often say what's good for kind of one disease state is often good for all types of overall health. So good for your bone health, good for your heart health, good for hypertension, good for cancer, and survivorship and risk reduction. So all of these things that we're going to talk about today are things I would recommend to everyone in general. The nutrients that they specifically focus on through food is minerals, specifically potassium, calcium, and magnesium. They focus on protein and they focus on fiber because you want to be sure to give your body the tools it needs to function at its best. Now, when we talk about healthy eating plans, my focus is on, are you giving your body enough of the nutrients it needs to function? My focus is not going to be on, you shouldn't have this or that's bad for you, you shouldn't have that. Because your body prefers nutrients in food, not pills, you'll notice this has nothing to do, no recommendations for taking any nutritional supplements or anything like that. However, there are some exceptions to our general rule that you don't need nutritional supplements. If you have low nutrient levels on blood tests, low vitamin D, low iron, low potassium, or you have reasons like you've gone through a specific treatment where it's recommended that you take calcium and vitamin D, or your bone health, they want you to do strength training and take a calcium supplement. Those are good reasons to take a supplement. And if your levels are low, using supplements are pretty essential for bringing your levels back up to normal. And then that's when your diet can help maintain it. Otherwise, we don't have a blanket recommendation that you need to take nutritional supplements. If you want to take a multivitamin, that's kind of fine with me as long as it's not a really expensive one or one that exceeds 100% of your nutrient needs. So, this eating plan will focus mostly on food. The nutrients that we talked about on this slide, which is the minerals, the protein, the fiber, the way they want you to get those nutrients is through these foods. And I'll say that just because those are the nutrients that were highlighted, they're not all the nutrients that are important. When you eat these foods, you get those highlighted, focused on nutrients, packaged with lots of other really great nutrition that's good for you. So eating mostly vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and low-fat dairy products, fish, poultry, beans, and nuts. I'll talk a little bit more about low-fat versus full-fat dairy when we kind of get more focused on that section. But what I'll point out here is that we are not eliminating any food groups. So I'm not a fan of the keto diet or any diets where they're completely eliminating food groups. If you want to, choose different types of grains, you want to focus on those whole grains. And then from the standpoint of eating meat or not, this diet or this eating plan certainly encourages dairy intake. So if you don't tolerate dairy, you can do soy milk as an alternative, but soy milk is not nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. And the other types of milks, I'm already getting into the milk here early on, but the other types of plant-based milks are often nutritionally, inadequate, or they're not the same quality as cow's milk. And when we focus on this diet, particularly on calcium, magnesium, potassium, not all of the plant-based milks will measure up to milk, which is how this particular eating plan is made. However, when it comes to animal proteins, there's nothing about this diet that says you can't eat meat or that you have to eat meat, if that makes sense. So from a protein standpoint, you can kind of choose. I will say they do encourage, even if you are a meat eater, that you would include these plant-based proteins in your diet anyway, because they're so good for you. Is there one grain that is better than the others? For example, oats. Not necessarily. I encourage people to get a variety. So I like for people to eat oats. I like them to eat wheat. I like them to eat quinoa or, barley, or just kind of a variety. Rice. Those will help to give a variety of nutrients with it. So no, as long as you're consuming, healthy whole grains, that's what's most important to me. The type of it is less important, but it's nice to get variety because you will get a good variety of nutrients as well when you kind of change up the foods within a food group. And then you'll spend, they're kind of eat less of this, which is my least favorite thing to talk about, but we kind of always have to. When we say eat more of this, we're going to say eat less of this. In their particular eating plan, the fats and oils are limited. The sodium is kept at 2,300 milligrams or less each day, which quite honestly is the general recommendation that most health groups give. And then sweets, they kind of give a standard 5 or less each week. Now, if you're asking me, and, I'm talking about having a healthy relationship with food, I don't recommend that people measure things or count, this or that. Sometimes I will recommend somebody do an audit of what they typically eat so they can start to put together the pieces of what kind of, food patterns do they normally eat and where they might find some tweaks that can move them more towards, this type of eating plan. But I'm not one that's like, oh, once you meet your 5 sweets each week, you don't get to have any more. It kind of really depends on the person and, what events are going on that week. So I wouldn't make this a hard kind of rule. I think it's helpful when some people want some guidelines around, how much is too much. If you're eating more than that, maybe you're actually hungry and you need to eat, some other foods before you have your sweets. So those are the things. Somebody put in the Q&A, what about butter? So butter counts as a fat, so a tablespoon of butter. Now, it doesn't specify in here, but certainly from a heart health standpoint, and I was kind of going to get into this in the dairy section, but from a heart health standpoint, we tend to say that less saturated fat, or that saturated fat is a less healthy type of fat, and we want more of the unsaturated fats than the saturated fats. There have been more recent studies showing that dairy fats are not as detrimental as maybe some others, but that's really kind of in the context of how balanced are people. So if you're having, butter on occasion, and mostly you have lots of unsaturated fats and plants and all those kinds of things, I don't think it matters as much. But if your eating pattern is more like the typical American, where it's, a lot more hyper processed foods, a lot fewer fruits and vegetables, the saturated fat intake tends to be higher, then that butter, switching it out for an unsaturated fat could make a difference. So it sort of depends on your day. And when we get to the action steps, I'll talk a little bit about what you could do with that. I think it also depends on your taste buds and what you use the butter for. I tend to recommend, if you're using butter as a spread, like on your bread, there could you substitute that for peanut butter or almond butter or hummus, which is a completely different flavor, I know. So it depends what you're using it for. Could you dip your bread in olive oil, like, more Italian style ways to kind of get that fat on your bread? So those are the kind of the things that I think about. And then if no, like there's nothing else that will fill the spot of butter in the way that you want it, then just have the butter. Or, the same thing with full fat milk. If full fat milk or full fat dairy is what you need, and some people actually need to get more calories, especially if you're not eating well or not eating enough calories, then we do like the extra fat in there. So it's a little bit dependent on the person. Personally, if I am going to spread butter on bread, I don't like stick butter because it's so hard to spread out of the fridge. And I live in the South, so most of the year you need to put your butter in the fridge or else it's just like a puddle of mess. So I tend to get the blends in the easy to spread tubs. That would be if I'm using it for some kind of spread. That's what I would use it for. And I use oil as much as, I can. So that was a long answer, but thanks for the great question. I will also point out that fluids count. So back on this like sweet thing, unless you have a love for sweetened beverages, sweet tea, for people who live in the South can be a very cultural kind of experience. And there are certain times at the family reunion or with certain foods that you feel like sweet tea has to go with it or else it's not complete. So I kind of understand that, or, pizza and a Coke, if you have some kind of connection there. But as much as we can get away from the sugar sweetened beverages, the typical American does consume a lot of their added sugars in beverages. So your body needs water. Unsweetened tea or unsweetened coffee can give you plant nutrients without excess added sugar. And then other options for sugar, no flavored beverages are sparkling water. You can dilute juice. Low fat milk are great options for flavor without added sugar. And the nice thing about that is if you can switch away from sweetened beverages to water or one of these unsweetened drinks, then it frees you up for a little bit more in the sweets section. So you don't have to use your sweets on sweetened beverages, and your taste buds are satisfied with something else that you might prefer that's sweet. That maybe you don't really care that much for sweetened beverages and you'd rather, meet your sweet needs with something else. All right, so what I want to do now is kind of go through each food group and what the DASH plan recommends for each one. Now, everybody's going to be a little bit different depending on your energy needs or calorie needs. And so, again, I'm not one that encourages a lot of counting. But we do have, for this particular plan, there's recommended amounts each day. And so we will start with, I think we go through with like what you want the most of, if that helps to make sense in terms of your day. So fruits and vegetables are for sure something that we want. Basically, at least like half of your food would be fruits and vegetables. Fresh, frozen, or dried whenever possible. Canned is an option. I think I have that on here. If if it's not there's not a convenient fresh, frozen, or dried fruit or vegetable available, canned certainly is, better than no vegetables. So I don't want that to be an excuse. But in this particular DASH plan, they recommend 8 to 10 each day. That's kind of 8 to 10 servings. If you've been to my other webinars, I often just talk about 4 to 5 cups of fruits and vegetables a day, which is basically 8 to 10 servings if a serving is a half a cup. And then I put down here 4 to 5 of each, that being like 4 to 5 fruits, 4 to 5 vegetables. Again, I don't need you to measure if it's a cup or a half a cup. I think if it's present, you check it off. I had 4 fruits or 3 fruits today and I had 5 vegetables, and hooray, that's really great. I mean, that is way above what the typical American does. So to me, fruits and vegetables are a simple way to start, and you don't need to track everything. You can just track when you eat a fruit or a vegetable. I think there's lots of ways that you can do that makes it fun. And I also find most people, they like fruits and vegetables. It's just not always something they think of to include in their snacks and their meals. But I typically recommend half of your meal to be fruits and or vegetables, or you might have half of your plate be vegetables and you have a fruit on the side. At least when I pack my lunch or my kids are kind of making their lunch, that's what we talk about is, do you have a fruit? Do you have a vegetable? Okay, great. I personally love salad kits. So if they're a little more expensive, but they save so much time, and it's easy for me to grab a salad kit, bring it to work and split it with a coworker, or some of them are small enough or I'll just have it as a meal with a little bit of, protein on it. So I think it's nice. There's a lot of convenience fruits and vegetables now, and fruits often come in their own convenient edible packaging, like an apple. So that's the fruits and vegetables section of the DASH plan. Next, in terms of the amount that you're eating every day, would be grains. So whole grains when possible. Doesn't always have to be whole grains, but as much as possible. When you go out to eat or, at a special occasion, it's harder to find the whole grains. So I always encourage people, if it works for you, to have the whole grains at home. And that way, when you're out, you don't have to worry about it as much. Just eat whatever's available and enjoy it. So it has 6 to 8 whole grains each day. Typically, that's about 2 per meal or 1 per snack. And 1 serving is like a slice of bread. So if you have a sandwich, that's 2. So if you have a sandwich with lunch and you have a fruit and you have a vegetable, that would meet your fruits, your vegetables, your grains. And I'm assuming you'd have some kind of protein on your sandwich. Once it's cooked, a half a cup of whole grain cereal, rice, or pasta is what's considered a serving, and an ounce of cereal. Typically an ounce is like, it's 3/4 a cup of, Cheerios, because they're kind of more larger in volume. But when it comes to something like grape nuts, which I like grape nuts, my kid likes grape nuts, but they are pretty hard if your teeth aren't too strong. But grape nuts, it's like 1/3 of a cup is an ounce because they're very packed. So each cereal is a little different, but I generally say a half to 3/4 of a cup of cereal. Nuts, seeds, and beans. This is 4 to 5 each week. And this is why I recommend that people have beans, nuts, or seeds once a day. I think it's just an easy thing. It's a great snack. It can even be a good bedtime snack if you tend to be eat on the early end and you tend to find yourself hungry at night. Nuts are something that's really filling, or nut butters. They can be really healthy for you and help to make sure that you don't go to bed hungry or wake up in the night hungry. Other things, beans, having a bean-based chili would count, or a hummus dip is made out of beans. Seeds are on here, nut butters. So most people can find something that they like in this category that they and change it up a little bit every day. But these are really important, great source of fiber, great source of protein, lots of nutrition. I will say if there was one meal that you had to have, beans and rice would pretty much provide you, because beans are also a vegetable. So if it's a protein, a vegetable, and they give you carbohydrate, beans cover 3 food groups in one, which to me is a power food. So if you start consuming more beans, make sure you slowly increase it. Most people know beans are the, musical fruit. And so your body can get used to it. Your intestinal tract can get used to some of the enzymes that come with the beans that tend to cause more gas. But also using Beano is totally a great option if it does cause you problems. Nuts, seeds, and beans, 4 to 5 per week. That's per week. So that's why I say 1 serving per day, which would technically be 7 per week. But I mean, once you aim for once a day, you'll probably get 4 or 5 a week. Now, if you're a vegetarian, you will have it. I mean, you're going to have beans probably every day. But this is if you're a meat eater for your protein, we want you to make sure that you also get plant protein. Dairy is low fat when possible, 2 to 3 each day. So that is 1 cup of milk, kefir, or buttermilk. Soy milk is a plant-based alternative. So if you don't tolerate dairy or you are vegan, don't eat any animal products, soy milk would be my preferred substitute. A cup of yogurt, you can get soy yogurt in some stores, and then 1.5 ounces of cheese. Those all count as dairy. Now, the DASH plan originally recommended low fat when possible, and they're recommending 2 to 3 servings per day. Again, that 1 cup of milk is a serving, or 1 cup of yogurt, or 4 cubes of cheese is basically what 1.5 ounces is. So 2 to 3 each day. I do find a lot of people sometimes will go above 3. I don't think that's necessarily healthy. It's not necessarily unhealthy. But I do think some people sort of displace their fruits and vegetables if they consume a lot of dairy. So that's something that, it's good for you. You won't have enough without too much. Does too much dairy cause some cancers? There's not conclusive evidence on that. There's actually evidence that calcium or dairy may reduce risk of colon cancer, but then there's some theories around dairy and prostate cancer. I don't think the evidence is super strong on, quite honestly, either of those. So I tend to, with the prostate one, it's not something I would tell people they need to limit. And there's not, for other types of cancer, there has not been a link. What I will say is there's like a few books or documentaries that aren't necessarily the strongest science that promotes a vegan diet, and they will claim that dairy and meat cause cancer, and therefore that's why you should be a vegan. Typically, those documentaries are funded by animal rights groups who their sort of focus is really more about animal rights and not consuming animals as a nutrient source, as opposed to nutritional studies. And the other thing is like the China study, and there's some other newer ones that came out, really looked at one epidemiologic or observational study, and it's very difficult to come to conclusions or consensus when the study design is observational versus intervention. Interventions in nutrition research are also extra challenging because if you want to use humans, you need them to cooperate with what you tell them to eat. And we humans don't like people telling us what to do. So that tends to mess up our study. So the people who claim that dairy causes cancer, I don't think they're being completely transparent about where they're getting their theories from and what science is behind it. And from the American Institute for Cancer Research, you don't have to just take my word for it, but you can look at AICR.org and see they've got great information on their website for scientists as well as consumers. And they kind of go into this a little bit more in terms of when you might want to be cautious with it. And the Prostate Cancer Foundation also has a really great nutrition guide, and I believe their website's pcf.org or Prostate Cancer Foundation. You can search, nutrition guide. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm comfortable with people consuming, dairy products in this 2 to 3 a day kind of range. I don't think there's risk to that, and I think there's a lot of nutritional benefits. And I'm realizing that I think I missed putting in here protein. So let me just add in this, nuts, beans, and seeds is its own category in the DASH eating plan. And then I hope you're taking notes here, okay? So I would have one more slide that says protein. And I did a whole webinar on protein a year ago. So if you're interested in that, you can go on cancerdietitian.com under webinars and find the protein webinar. But I would add in that it is basically 4 to 5 ounces a day is what is recommended for the DASH plan. Okay, so this is 4 to 5 servings of nuts, seeds, and beans. And then for meat, it's 5 to 6 or 4 to 6 ounces, which is a little bit confusing. That's the one thing it's not my favorite about the DASH plan is that they talk in servings. And I think servings are difficult for people because every food group has a different serving size. And so you're constantly trying to, convert things. But if we're talking about meat, so if you get your protein from nuts, beans, and seeds, about 1/2 cup of cooked beans is going to be about 3 ounces of protein. Okay, so if we're talking about 4 to 6 ounces a day, nuts, beans, and seeds is 4 to 5 servings a week, but protein is 4 to 6 ounces a day. Okay, a piece of meat the size of a deck of cards or a can of tuna is 3 ounces. So it's 2 small, we would call that small pieces of meat a day. Usually deli meats are like 1 ounce per slice. If we're talking about 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, that's, about 1 ounce of protein. So 4 to 6 ounces of protein a day is what the DASH plan has you consuming. If it's meat, that's 2 small pieces of meat a day. If it's nuts, beans, and seeds, it tends to be volume-wise a little bit more. But this is why, we encourage, because you're also getting protein from dairy, That's why if you're consuming meat, you only need 2 servings a day. For the most part, this to me sounds like 1 meal a day would be a vegetarian meal. And that would probably get you some kind of nuts or beans or seeds, or you using your dairy as your protein at that meal. And then if you're a meat eater, you have a small portion of meat, which covers 1/4 of your plate for your protein. So I hope that makes sense. For next time, I'm adding in the slide. Okay, what about processed meat? Yeah, we'd prefer, the recommendation around processed meats is basically limit them as much as possible. And what is possible is different per person based on your kind of habits and your taste buds and all that. So nitrites and nitrates, basically these are preservatives that are used, whether they're natural or artificial made, we don't think it makes a difference in terms of your health. So some people will say, well, it's natural nitrites. If nitrites are nitrites and they affect our body, it doesn't matter what the source is. And that hasn't been teased out. So we just kind of have to figure that out in terms of moderation. Processed meats will still provide you with protein. So that's your only option for protein at a meal. I would tell you, don't worry about it. If you have an option and you can choose like sliced, chicken or chicken salad, tuna salad, those types of things, and that might be a better option rather than processed, but sometimes that might be your best choice. But technically, the recommendation is to limit your processed meats, yes. So as I say, eating is an opportunity to promote your health. And so you want to be sure you're including all these things. What I think is so nutritious about the DASH diet, or the DASH plan, excuse me, is that it really does key in on what things you need to include in order for your body to function at its best, to help keep your blood pressure in a healthy level, to promote good heart health, to support your immune system, and to reduce risk of cancer. All these things that we talked about are things that I often talk about in other, webinars that I've done. So here's your action plan for the information today. Is first of all, do an audit on what you typically eat. You can write down the foods and beverages you eat for 3 to 5 days and estimate how much of each food group you typically choose. I don't need you to add up calories. I don't need you to write up calories, or if you want to look at the protein grams, if it has a food label, that might be helpful if you're not as familiar with how much protein is in different foods. But really, it's more to me about like, what is the ratio of foods you've got in your day? Do you have, are you eating fruits and vegetables throughout the day, and you're getting somewhere around, you have 8 fruits and vegetables you ate that day? Are your grains typically whole grains, and sometimes they're not whole grains, and that's okay? Are you having more, than 3 servings of dairy a day? And when is that? And is that taking the place of maybe another vegetable or fruit that you might want to have? So those are the things. First of all, don't change what you're eating when you do your audit, or else it's not helpful. So, you just have a piece of paper, or you use an app, or whatever it is. I don't like people to focus on calories. So sometimes those apps will automatically calculate them for you. And for some people, we have this like mental relationship with the calories that I would like for us to strip away, a negative one. So remind yourself that calories are a unit of energy, and you don't want low energy. You want to make sure you have enough energy for the day. So, but what we do want to make sure is that we are getting our energy from these foods that are going to give us the best nutrient profile in order to meet our needs. So once you've done your audit, you kind of see what your typical, patterns are around when you eat and what food groups are present at each time of day. Then I would encourage you to choose one meal to focus on. You do not need to overhaul the whole thing. Okay, that's way too much to do at one time. It will be frustrating and not practical. So I like to tell people, choose one meal. Which meal do you think would be the easiest to adjust towards more DASH focused choices? Okay, so always choose the easy one first. choose the easy one. And even within that one meal, just pick one thing you do a little bit different. Do you double your vegetable portion and reduce your meat portion? If it's, say, dinner and you're like, wow, my meat portion's pretty big compared to a deck of cards or a can of tuna. Sometimes it's not even changing what you eat, but it's changing the ratios of the food. Maybe it's breakfast and you don't really eat an actual meal for breakfast. This happens for a lot of people. They have, one thing like a piece of toast with cheese on it. That's not a complete meal because you don't have fruit there. I will give you a pass. You don't have to have vegetables at breakfast, but if you do have vegetables in your breakfast, you get bonus points because that's a hard one for people. If you do an omelet, a lot of times that's when you can get vegetables in, or a green smoothie. Putting some spinach in a smoothie is an easy way to add vegetables to your morning without it feeling like something completely different. So yeah, choose one meal to focus on and figure out what you think would be the easiest one to adjust. And then notice. So when you start making changes, pay attention to how the food tastes to you, how full you feel, after your meal is over. What is your energy like after you tweak that meal? How is your digestion going? Has it changed since you've tweaked that to maybe be focused more on higher fiber or more filling types of food choices? Protein, fat, and fiber are all three important components of feeling full or satiated. So if you find that, an hour after you eat something, you're hungry again, you might look back and think, did I, provide my body with enough fiber? Did I have enough protein? Did I have enough fat? Did I have enough carbohydrate in that meal for my body to feel full? It's completely normal for you to be hungry 3 or 4 hours after a meal. Okay. So your meals are not going to last all day. Skipping meals is not helpful. So I would encourage you as much as possible, eat something within an hour of waking up in the morning, and then have something every, 3 to 4 hours throughout the day. For a lot of people, that's 3 meals and 1 snack, or 3 meals and 2 snacks. For me, it tends to be 3 meals, an afternoon snack, and sometimes like a snack or dessert before bed. That's kind of how I work out. That I've noticed that helps keep me regulated throughout the day so that I'm not getting overly hungry before it's time to eat. So those are things you want to pay attention to so that you can make those little changes. All right, so here's our take-home points for the day. First, include fruits and veggies in your meals and snacks as much as you can. That's the one thing that you have the most of during the day. Choose dairy 2 to 3 times a day. Have plant proteins at least once a day, and choose whole grains to maximize your nutrient intake. And then for your protein choices, otherwise, if you're eating meat, we talked about 4 to 6 ounces, which is about 2 small servings a day. You will get your protein filled up with your plant proteins and your dairy foods otherwise. All right, so these are, and I'll send these out in a follow-up email. I will send the recording. I will post the recording on YouTube, and I'll also post the audio on the Cancer Dietitian podcast. You can find out more about the DASH eating plan at the National Health, Lung, and Blood Institute website. So that's on this slide, and I'll send it out in the follow-up email. You can go to cancerdietitian.com if you want to watch other webinars. You just go to the webinar category. I mentioned AICR.org as a good resource, and the Prostate Cancer Foundation, PCF.org. And then save the date for our next webinar. I'm going to cover anti-inflammatory eating on March 21st at 3 p.m. So I'll be sure to send an email about that ahead of time so you know to register to get the link. Are there any other questions? You guys did a great job sending questions in throughout. If there's any other questions, or if you want a copy of a one-page handout that kind of summarizes all this information, just send me an email and let me know you'd like it, and I'll send it over to you. That's all for today. Thank you so much for joining me for the January webinar. And if you have any questions, email me. And I look forward to hosting you again next time. Thanks so much. Bye.